looking at a bright headline here. It says in unheard.com, "The Antichrist now rules us all," by Paul Kingsnorth. "The age of progress has turned everything into machines and money," he says. We'll just take some pieces from it. It says, "Throughout history, the poets, the prophets, and mystics have usually done a better job of predicting the future than pundits, politicians, or scientists. Generally, the reward for their perspicacity is to be ignored or laughed at, but luckily they are usually far enough from the center not to notice or care." He goes on to say, "Presenting disorder as order and truth as lies was the way that Satan rolled. The more or less direct agents of the adversary," he explained, using the biblical name for what Europeans would later come to call the devil, "always aim to invert reality. Right is wrong, black is white, up is down, there is no truth, do what thou wilt. This has always been the adversary's line, and today it is prominent in all quarters." The heterodox Catholic philosopher Ivan Illich, who died in 2002, also believed we were living in the time of Antichrist, but for different reasons. For him, any claims that we lived in a secular age were nonsense. The modern West was still Christian, he said, but it had disastrously attempted to codify the spontaneous expressions of love, which Christ has shown to be God's desire for humanity within systems and institutions. So this is something I talk about all the time, by the way, this thing. But it's really well said here. And we've got articles on neighborschoice.com that you can look up. Click on essays. You'll see these ideas talked about by Surat Dasgupta. Check it out on neighborschoice.com. Click on essays. The modern West disastrously tried to codify the spontaneous expressions of love, which Christ had shown to be God's desire for humanity, within systems and institutions. You try to institutionalize and sterilize and bureaucratize love that is spontaneous and from your heart. It can't work. First the church and then the supposedly secular liberal states which had succeeded it had attempted to transmute Christian love into obligation and enforce it by law. That's the whole point of a neighbor's choice. You have to desire mercy, not sacrifice. Sacrifice is using the force of law to obligate love. You see? I like this article so far. Thus twisting it into a new form of oppression. His biographer, David Cayley, who we've had on the program, explained in a recent essay that Illich's work emphatically rejects the idea that ours is a post-Christian era. On the contrary, he says, "I believe this to be the most obviously Christian epoch, which might be quite close to the end of the world." A decade or so before Illich was writing, the Jewish beat poet Allen Ginsberg was also attending to the dark spiritual undercurrent of the age. He had a different interpretation of its source, or perhaps he was just using a different name. And how he identified the forward march of industrial modernity, and especially the hypocrisy and brutality of the American empire, with the pagan god Moloch, who demanded human sacrifice from his devotees. Moloch, whose mind is pure machinery. Moloch, whose blood is running money. Moloch, whose fingers are 10 armies. Moloch, whose love is endless oil and stone. Moloch, whose soul is electricity and banks. Moloch, whose poverty is the specter of genius. Moloch, whose fate is a cloud of sexless hydrogen. Moloch, whose name is the mind. Ginsberg, it seemed, could also sense that the spirit of his age was not under human control, either out in the world or in his own soul and mind. Usually this is easier to talk about in poetry or fiction, for the age doesn't look kindly on anything which can't be quantified. It can deal with Ginsberg, but it doesn't want to talk about Moloch. It can just about cope with Christ if he has been brought down to our level, made into an activist or a defender of culture or a cosmic manifestation of the self. But it has nothing to say about Antichrist, who blows the whole story sky high. As for St. Paul's famous notion that the world is subject not only to nature but to principalities and powers which wish us ill, this kind of talk was supposed to have been wrecked on the shores of the Enlightenment, never to be seen again. But the powers and principalities didn't die in the shipwreck of the old world. They just took on new forms. Today we can, in fact, still talk about these strange underlying forces as long as we use the correct language. Take, for example, the Silicon Valley philosopher Kevin Kelly's pet notion that technology has its own mind and its own purpose, that through the web of what he calls the technium, something is using us to create itself. Kelly sees technology growing into something self-aware and independent of its human creators, as he explained in his book, What Technology Wants. It may have once been as simple as an old computer program merely parroting what we told it, but now it is more like a very complex organism that often follows its own urges, he says. Other breathless Silicon Valley mavens, from Mark Zuckerberg with his metaverse to Ray Kurzweil with his singularity, regularly talk in the same register about what the technium is taking us, of where it's taking us. Our job, they seem to imply, is simply to service it as it rolls forward under its own steam, remaking everything in its own image, rebuilding the world, turning us, if we are lucky, into little gods. They never consider where this story has been heard before. They never confront or seem to even comprehend what Illich and Guénon and even Ginsburg would have known, in which many a saint would confirm if they could hear the technium's new story. That AI on the right lips can sound just like another way of saying Antichrist. Maybe it's just me, but the ongoing and rapid inversion of so much we have previously taken for granted increasingly seems to be happening independently of human action. It's as if something else has become manifest in some way we can't quite put our fingers on, and has stimulated the craziness of the times. Perhaps it has become self-aware like Skynet. Perhaps it is approaching its singularity. Perhaps it has always been there watching and is now seizing its moment. Or perhaps it is simply beginning to spin out of control as our systems and technologies become so complex that we can no longer steer them in our chosen direction. Either way, this force seems to be, in some inexplicable way, independent of us and yet acting within us too. Let's give this force a name, a less provocative name for now than Moloch or Antichrist. Let's keep it simple. Let's just call this force progress. Then, a la Kevin Kelly, let's ask ourselves a simple question. What does progress want? So when you look at this story that I've shared with you, it's interesting because it really tells a lot about who we are. What progress wants is to replace us, the article says. Replace us with what? The article goes on to say, the rushing power that runs beneath the age of progress, the energy of the modern world, the river that carries us onward, where is it taking us? We know the answer. Humans cannot live for very long without a glimpse of the transcendent or an aspiration dimly understood to become one with it. Denied this path, we will make our own. Denied a glimpse of heaven, we will try to build it here. This imperfect world, these imperfect people, they must be superseded, improved, and remade. Flawed matter is in our hands now. We know what to do. That's an essay here on unheard.com, raising some interesting questions. It's called The Antichrist Now Rules Us All by Paul Kingsnorth. I don't think progress has to be that demented. I think progress was made to be beautiful, nonviolent, creative, and wondrous. And I think we have the choice, if we imitate the right role models and imitate the right attitudes, to correct course and in a remarkable and amazing and unexpected way. But it's all in front of us, folks. We can't sit as spectators and hope somebody else figures it out for us. We have to live beautifully, even when no one's looking, even when no one is giving us accolades or likes on social media. Live beautifully, live righteously, live creatively, peacefully, joyfully, non-violently. And when you do that, you'll be ready to take on these challenges that we have to work together as a community to heal. It's an exciting opportunity, folks. Progress does not have to be demented. It does not have to be sacrificial. It can be mercy-driven. It can be nonviolent. And it doesn't have to have a heavy burden to it. It can have a light burden as we enact it and embody it and live it out every day. I'm David Gornoski. Godspeed.